I'm 28 years old, and while my life isn't exactly where I imagined it would be, it's manageable. After my father passed away a few years ago, I moved back in with my mom. She's on a fixed income, and since then, I've been helping out with the bills. It's not the ideal situation for either of us, but it works. We're a team, keeping things quiet, predictable, and stable. Things have been manageable, and I've grown used to this new rhythm. Then, out of nowhere, my older brother Ryan decided to move back in. Ryan's 32, and growing up, he was always the golden child. He had this aura of success around him, especially in my mom's eyes. He was always chasing some big dream. He moved out when he was 20, determined to make a name for himself in the city. But things didn't go as planned. His big dreams didn't work out the way he hoped. He lost his job, and his long-term relationship ended in a breakup. That's when Ryan showed up on our doorstep, suitcase in hand, looking for a place to stay. I wasn't thrilled about the idea. Sure, it's our family home, but we've got a good thing going here, and I didn't want that disrupted. Mom wasn't about to turn him away, though. She's always had this soft spot for Ryan, and as much as I wanted to voice my concerns, I didn't feel like I could push him away. So, Ryan moved in. From the second he walked through the door, it was clear that he had no plan. He claimed he was figuring things out, that he was job hunting and trying to get back on his feet. But most days, Ryan would roll out of bed at noon, grab a bowl of cereal, and then park himself in front of the TV or his gaming setup for hours. It didn't take long for me to notice his pattern. Ryan wasn't just a casual gamer. He was the kind of guy who spent money he didn't have on in-game skins, loot boxes, and other digital nonsense. I started seeing credit card notifications pop up on his phone, even though he'd claimed he was too broke to contribute to groceries. It was infuriating. The first time he asked me to cover his share of the utilities, he promised it would be just this once, and that he'd pay me back as soon as he got his next paycheck. I didn't even ask for the details. I just said, okay, thinking he would actually follow through. Of course, there was no paycheck, and there was no effort from him to pay me back. My mom defended him, of course. She told me Ryan was going through a tough time and that he just needed patience. She couldn't help him financially. Her own budget barely covered her expenses, but somehow she expected me to step in and fill that gap. Ryan, of course, was playing into this perfectly. He acted like it was my responsibility to help him out because, according to him, I had a good job and no kids. It became a pattern, one I didn't know how to handle. The original arrangement between my mom and me was simple. We split the bills and groceries. But with Ryan's arrival, that balance was completely off. He didn't contribute anything. No rent, no food, nothing. He kept promising he'd pitch in when things settled, but things never did. And to make matters worse, Ryan had no respect for anything that was mine. I'd come home from work, expecting to find my snacks or leftovers where I left them, only to find them gone. When I confronted him about it, he just shrugged it off, saying, "It's just food." It wasn't just the food. It was everything. Ryan wasn't just freeloading. He was actively taking advantage of the situation. One day, I came home to find a new gaming chair set up in the living room. It was a ridiculously expensive chair that he called a stress purchase. He laughed it off as if it was no big deal. Meanwhile, I was the one covering his share of the water bill because he'd forgotten to pay it. The audacity was infuriating. I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. I thought maybe he was genuinely struggling and just needed some time to get back on his feet. But the more I observed, the clearer it became that he wasn't trying. Ryan would dismiss job postings, claiming they were beneath him or not worth the commute. When he wasn't gaming, he was scrolling through social media or napping. But it wasn't just his laziness that bothered me. It was his entitlement. It was like he expected everything to be handed to him just because he was my brother. I started noticing small things too, things I could ignore at first, but they started adding up. I found out that Ryan had been borrowing money from Mom behind my back, small amounts here and there, but it added up over time. I'd always known Ryan had trouble with money, but this was a whole new level of entitlement. One day, I came home to find Ryan's new gaming chair set up in the living room, proudly displayed, while the power bill, his share, still hadn't been paid. That's when I realized I couldn't keep enabling him. I wasn't sure how to approach it without blowing up, but something had to give. I started keeping a closer eye on what Ryan was doing. I noticed him snooping through my mail one day, probably looking for financial documents. I also found out he'd been using our shared streaming accounts to rent movies and buy add-ons for games without asking. The more I uncovered, the angrier I got. Mom kept telling me to be patient, that Ryan just needed time to adjust, but how much time was enough? I didn't see him making any effort to change. And it wasn't just a financial strain. It was starting to feel like an emotional and mental strain as well. His presence was draining. The house felt tense all the time. I was tired of being the one holding everything together while Ryan coasted. Something had to change. And if Ryan wasn't willing to step up, I was ready to make some hard decisions. One night, I was at my breaking point. I had been ignoring it for far too long, but the situation had reached a tipping point. I had to confront Ryan, and it wasn't going to be pretty. The house had become a place of constant tension, and I couldn't keep living like this. I didn't know exactly when things had reached their breaking point. It felt like one small thing after another was pushing me to the edge, and it had all accumulated into something that I couldn't ignore anymore. The house was no longer a place of comfort. It had become a battleground, one I wasn't prepared for. Every day, Ryan seemed to push the limits further. There was no end in sight to his behavior, and at that point, I was too fed up to keep pretending that everything was fine. It wasn't just about the money anymore. The financial strain was bad enough, but it was more than that. The disrespect, the complete disregard for any shared responsibility, it all added up to something bigger. Ryan was acting like he was entitled to everything, like he didn't have to contribute to anything because, well, he was my brother. And somehow, that made it my problem to fix. It wasn't just the bills that weren't getting paid, it was the house itself. The atmosphere was suffocating. We couldn't even sit down for dinner without some passive-aggressive comment or an issue with food. I started noticing more and more things. His gaming chair, which he'd bought with money he didn't have, wasn't just an indulgence. It was a symbol of how he had no concept of responsibility. Meanwhile, I was covering his share of the utility bills, picking up the slack when he forgot to pay anything, and watching him act like none of it was his problem. I tried to reason with him at first. I kept telling myself that maybe I just needed to talk to him. Maybe he didn't realize how much he was taking advantage of me. But every time I tried to bring it up, Ryan had an excuse. He was going through a tough time. He was figuring things out. Nothing was ever his fault. It was always someone or something else. It was exhausting. The more I saw him lounging around, gaming or scrolling on his phone, the angrier I got. It was like he was using this hard time as an excuse to do nothing at all. He wasn't even trying to get back on his feet. He dismissed job opportunities as beneath him, or too much of a hassle. He spent hours talking about how he couldn't find anything worthwhile. But I could see what he was doing instead, wasting time. He wasn't doing anything to change his situation. It felt like he was waiting for someone to pull him out of his rut, and that someone, it seemed, was me. The final straw came when I overheard a conversation that made it all crystal clear. A family friend casually mentioned seeing Ryan hanging out at a bar in the middle of the day, a day he'd told us he was going to a job interview. That was it. That moment was my tipping point. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Ryan wasn't just slacking off. He was lying. He wasn't struggling to find work. He wasn't putting in any effort at all. I started keeping track of everything. His spending, his lack of effort, the lies he was telling. It wasn't just the unpaid bills. It was everything. The missed rent payments, the groceries he'd eaten without asking, the items he'd borrowed from Mom without permission. I'd walked into the living room one day to find him gaming, as usual, while the power bill was piling up. His latest stress purchase, his expensive gaming chair, was now the center of attention in the living room. Even though I was paying his share of the water bill, it felt like a slap in the face. I wasn't going to sit back and let this continue. One day, I came home to find him snacking on the food I had bought specifically for myself. These weren't things I had just casually bought. They were treats, things I rarely splurge on. And within hours, most of it was gone. When I confronted him about it, he rolled his eyes and said, "It's just food, man. Just food." He made it sound like I was being ridiculous for caring. I felt my blood boiling. It was always the same. He was so comfortable taking whatever he wanted without thinking twice, and the excuses just kept rolling in. The situation was starting to feel like a pressure cooker, and I knew it was only a matter of time before it exploded. I wasn't going to be the one to keep it from blowing up, not anymore. Then came the final act of defiance. Ryan had been using shared accounts, including the streaming services, to rent movies and buy in-game items without asking. It was another thing I had been ignoring, but it kept adding up. Every time I tried to bring it up, he'd dismiss it like it was no big deal. But I was done being dismissed. It was starting to feel like I was his bank, his personal grocery store, and his personal counselor all rolled into one. I was done being his enabler. When I finally confronted him, it wasn't just about the money anymore. It was everything. I told him that he needed to start contributing to the house and that I wasn't going to keep covering for him. He just shrugged it off, as if it was nothing. That's when I snapped. I had been patient. I had been understanding, and I had given him the benefit of the doubt. But there was no more patience left. It was clear he wasn't going to change unless something drastic happened. I couldn't stand the constant tension anymore. Something had to give. And if Ryan wasn't willing to step up, then I was ready to make the decision for him. I wasn't about to continue enabling his behavior, and I wasn't about to let him keep draining me, emotionally, mentally, or financially. This wasn't about being his big brother anymore. It was about doing what was right for both of us. I sat him down one evening after dinner, with Mom present. I laid everything out for him: his failure to contribute, the missed bills, the lies, and the lack of effort in finding work. I told him that he had 2 weeks to start paying his share, or he would have to leave. It wasn't an empty threat. I was done. He needed to understand that. Ryan didn't take it well. He immediately accused me of being selfish, of not caring about him, and of trying to kick him out when he needed help the most. He twisted everything around, making it sound like I was the bad guy. Mom, of course, took his side, at least at first. She told me I should be more understanding, that Ryan just needed more time to adjust. But this time I wasn't backing down. The ultimatum was set, and if Ryan didn't change, he would have to leave. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about fairness, respect, and boundaries. Ryan didn't take it well, and the tension in the house only increased from there. The day came when I couldn't ignore it anymore. The frustration had been building for weeks, and I could feel the tension in my chest every time I walked through the door. Ryan's carefree attitude toward the bills, his disregard for the rules of the house, and the way he continued to take advantage of Mom's kindness. It was all too much. I had to say something, and I knew it wasn't going to be easy. The house had become a pressure cooker, and if I didn't step in now, I feared it would explode. It was a weeknight, and Mom had made one of our usual dinners, pasta. I was sitting at the table trying to eat, but my mind kept wandering back to everything that had been building up. Ryan was sitting across from me, picking at his food, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. I took a deep breath, then set my fork down and looked him straight in the eye. "Ryan," I started, my voice steady but firm. "We need to talk." He looked up, chewing his food slowly, and for a moment, I thought he might brush it off, but I couldn't let that happen. "I've been covering your share of the utilities for weeks," I said, the frustration leaking through in my voice despite my effort to stay calm. "And I'm done with it. You need to start contributing to the house." Ryan rolled his eyes, his usual nonchalant attitude firmly in place. He leaned back in his chair, twirling his fork around like it was some joke. "Oh, come on. It's not that big of a deal," he said dismissively, as though my words didn't carry the weight they should have. "Things have been tough for me lately. You know that." I could feel my anger simmering beneath the surface, but I forced myself to stay level-headed. "I get that things are tough," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "But that doesn't mean you can just coast and expect everyone else to pick up your slack. You're not contributing to the rent. You're eating food that isn't yours. And now you've got a new gaming chair that costs more than your share of the utilities. You're not even looking for work, Ryan. What exactly are you doing to pull your weight?" I could see the tension building in his face. He didn't like being called out, but instead of facing the truth, he started deflecting. "You're just rubbing your success in my face," he shot back, his voice tinged with bitterness. "You think I don't know you're doing well and that I should be able to help more? Well, maybe I don't want to be like you, always working and making all this money. Maybe I'm not cut out for that life." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Ryan had always been the one to talk about chasing his big dreams, and now he was acting like it was a bad thing to have a job and contribute to the household. It was like everything I had worked for was being turned against me. But I wasn't backing down. "Ryan, I've never once flaunted anything," I said, my voice tight with frustration. "I work hard for what I have and I'm trying to help out here. But you're taking advantage of that. I've been patient, but patience has its limits. You need to start stepping up or find a way to contribute, or I'm going to have to make some hard choices." Ryan's face twisted with anger. He stood up abruptly, pushing his chair back with a loud scrape that echoed in the quiet room. "You guys are ganging up on me," he yelled. "I can't believe this. I've been going through hell, and all you do is criticize me. You think I don't know how hard things are? You think I don't know how bad I've messed up?" His voice was rising now, but I wasn't backing down. "It's not about making you feel bad, Ryan," I said, my voice firm. "It's about being responsible. I can't keep doing this for you. You're an adult. It's time to act like one." Mom, who had been sitting quietly through the whole exchange, finally spoke up. "You need to give him some space, honey," she said, her tone soft but weary. "He's been through a lot. Just be patient, okay?" I looked at her, and for a moment, I could see the conflict in her eyes. She wanted to support him, but I could tell she was starting to see what I was seeing, the way Ryan was taking advantage of us. But instead of standing firm, she hesitated, defending him like she always had. "Mom," I said, my voice calm but serious, "I'm not asking for much. I'm asking for him to step up. I'm not going to let him keep taking advantage of us." Ryan, who had been pacing angrily, turned to me and sneered. "You think I'm some kind of charity case? Maybe I'm not as perfect as you, but I'm not a damn burden." I shook my head, frustration bubbling over. "You don't get it, do you, Ryan? It's not about being perfect. It's about taking responsibility. You've been here for months, and you've done nothing to help. You've been lazy, and now you've made this situation even worse by not even trying." Ryan's face reddened with anger, and without another word, he stormed out of the room, slamming his bedroom door behind him. The silence that followed was deafening. I stayed at the table for a moment, trying to calm my racing thoughts. This wasn't how I wanted things to go, but it had to be said. Over the next few days, things only got worse. Ryan gave me the silent treatment, barely acknowledging my presence except to make passive-aggressive comments under his breath. When Mom begged me to apologize, I refused. I wasn't the one in the wrong here, and I wasn't going to apologize for standing up for what was fair. The next blow came when I got the water bill. His share was still unpaid, and the company was threatening to cut us off unless we paid the full amount. I paid it, but I was furious. When I confronted Ryan, he just shrugged as if it was no big deal. "I'll pay you back when I can," he said casually. "Yeah, right," I muttered under my breath, knowing full well that he had no intention of following through. Things only escalated from there. I caught him going through my mail one day, and when I confronted him, he acted nonchalant, like it was nothing. It didn't sit right with me, so I started locking my bedroom door when I wasn't home. But the final straw came a few days later. I bought some groceries, items I'd been looking forward to enjoying, and within a day, most of it was gone. When I confronted Ryan, he rolled his eyes. "It's just food," he said dismissively. "What's the big deal?" I was done. The audacity, the entitlement. It was too much to take. That night, a family friend mentioned seeing Ryan at a bar during the middle of the day on a weekday, a day he claimed he was going to a job interview. That was it. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Ryan wasn't just slacking off, he was lying to us, and I couldn't stand it any longer. I had to make a decision. It was time to confront Ryan once and for all. Something had to change, and if he wasn't willing to step up, I was prepared to take the necessary steps to stop enabling him. This wasn't just a financial issue anymore. It was about respect, responsibility, and fairness. And if he wasn't going to play by those rules, I was done. By now, I was fed up. Ryan had crossed every line I had drawn, and I couldn't keep pretending things were fine. It wasn't just about the unpaid bills or his constant gaming. It was the blatant disrespect, the way he was treating our home and our mother. I had been patient. I had tried to reason with him, but enough was enough. Something had to change. The tipping point came when I came home from work one day to find all my snacks, stuff I had bought for myself, completely gone. Leftovers that I had set aside for lunch, gone. I had warned him about eating my food before, but this was different. It wasn't just about food. It was about boundaries, and Ryan had none. When I confronted him, he rolled his eyes and shrugged, saying, "It's just food. Calm down." I had been calm for far too long. This wasn't a small issue. Ryan wasn't just freeloading, he was actively taking advantage of the situation, and I was tired of carrying the weight. I had been covering the utilities, groceries, and anything else that came up, all while he sat around playing games and making excuses. The gaming chair he bought, the things he bought with money he didn't have, it was all adding up, and I was the one paying the price. I had been letting it slide, hoping he would get his act together, but I realized I couldn't let it go any longer. So I decided to confront him right then and there. Mom had made pasta for dinner that evening, something simple but comforting. I figured it would be the right time. As we sat down to eat, I set my fork down and turned to Ryan. "We need to talk," I said, trying to keep my tone calm but firm. "You need to start contributing around here. I'm covering your share of the bills, and that's not fair anymore. You've been living here for months and you haven't done anything to help." Ryan didn't react right away. He just leaned back in his chair, twirling his fork around, almost like he thought I was joking. "Come on, man," he said. "Things are tough. You know that? I'm trying." "Really?" "No, you're not," I said, cutting him off. "You spend all day gaming and then tell me you don't have money for the utilities. You act like I'm supposed to pick up the slack just because I have a job and no kids? That's not how this works." Ryan frowned, his defensive posture kicking in. "Well, you've got it easy. You don't have the same problems I have. You don't understand what it's like." I felt my anger rising, but I kept my voice steady. "I get it, but you've been here for months, and you're still doing nothing to get back on your feet. You keep making excuses, but I'm the one holding everything together, and I can't do it anymore. This is not my responsibility." Ryan's face twisted with frustration. "You're making it harder for me. You don't know what it's like to lose everything." I took a deep breath. "I'm not trying to make it harder for you. I'm trying to make you see that you need to take responsibility for your life. We can't keep going like this. I can't keep paying for everything and doing all the work while you sit here, waiting for things to fall into your lap." Mom, of course, tried to jump in. "Ryan's been through a lot. He's trying to figure things out. Can't you be more understanding?" I turned to her, trying not to let my frustration show. "I'm not asking for understanding. I'm asking him to step up. It's not fair to me, and it's not fair to you." Ryan slumped back in his chair, crossing his arms. "You don't get it," he muttered. "I'm just trying to get back on my feet. I don't need this pressure right now." But I wasn't backing down. "You have 2 weeks to start paying your share. I'm not going to keep carrying you. If you don't, then you'll have to leave. I've given you enough chances." Ryan stood up, knocking his chair back in the process. "You're serious about this, aren't you?" he snapped. "I am," I said firmly. He stormed off to his room, slamming the door behind him. The silence in the house was deafening. I knew things were about to get worse, but I also knew I had made the right decision. I couldn't keep enabling him. He needed to face the consequences of his actions, and if that meant he had to leave, then so be it. Mom tried to soften things, begging me to apologize just to keep the peace, but I wasn't going to. I had done enough. Ryan needed to change, or he needed to leave. There was no middle ground anymore. The next few days were tense. Ryan barely acknowledged me, except for passive-aggressive comments and snide remarks. He was trying to guilt-trip me, making it clear he didn't agree with my decision. But I wasn't wavering. It was time for him to grow up and take responsibility, and then came the water bill. His share was still unpaid, and the company was threatening to cut off our service. I paid for it, but my frustration was reaching its limit. When I brought it up to Ryan, he gave me the same excuse. "I'll pay you back when I can." At this point, I knew that would never happen. That was the final straw. I had given him enough chances. He either stepped up or he was gone. I wasn't backing down. The days following our confrontation were tense. Ryan's behavior didn't change, and the pressure in the house only increased. He was still the same, avoiding responsibility, making excuses, and playing the victim. Every time I brought up his lack of effort, he responded with deflection or outright denial. Mom, despite her good intentions, kept siding with him. She still couldn't bring herself to see how much he was taking advantage of the situation, and I was growing increasingly frustrated. The final blow came when I caught him using my laptop. I had left it on my desk while I stepped out for a moment, and when I came back, he was sitting there, scrolling through my files. I could tell he hadn't been looking for anything specific. He was just snooping. He didn't even try to hide it when I confronted him. He acted casual, brushing it off as if it was no big deal. "I was just checking something online. My phone's acting up," he said with a shrug, as if it was perfectly normal to invade my privacy. At that moment, something inside me snapped. This wasn't just about the money anymore. This was about boundaries. He had crossed a line that couldn't be ignored. The trust I once had in him had vanished, replaced with a deep resentment. I started locking my bedroom door whenever I wasn't home. I didn't trust him anymore, and I couldn't allow him to keep taking advantage of me. The situation was rapidly spiraling out of control, but the real breaking point came when I found out Ryan had taken more of my things. One evening, I came home to find that a few of my personal items were missing, things I knew I hadn't misplaced. My old laptop, a watch my dad had given me, and even a small box of Mom's jewelry were all gone. I immediately thought of Ryan, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions without proof. The next day, I talked to a neighbor who had a security camera facing our street. They agreed to check the footage, and when they showed it to me, I couldn't believe my eyes. Ryan had snuck into the house late at night through the back window. He'd been carrying a backpack, and after about 20 minutes he left, the bag noticeably fuller than when he arrived. I was furious. This was no longer a situation of him needing help or figuring things out. He had crossed the line into stealing. The proof was right there, clear as day. I called Mom, and we sat down together to confront him. We decided to meet at a coffee shop to show him the footage. When we confronted him, he immediately went on the defensive. He denied everything at first, claiming he had no idea what we were talking about. But when we pressed him, his story started to unravel. Eventually, he admitted that he had taken the items to sell them for rent money. He was so casual about it, so nonchalant, like it was a normal thing to do. Mom was devastated. She looked heartbroken, and I could see how much it hurt her to realize that Ryan had gone this far. But I couldn't hold back anymore. I knew that if we didn't take action now, he would continue to take advantage of us. I was done enabling him. At that point, we knew we had to do something. I couldn't just let him get away with stealing from us. I filed a police report, using the security footage as evidence. Mom was upset at first, but she eventually admitted that it was the right thing to do. It was time for Ryan to face the consequences of his actions. The fallout was immediate. Ryan cut off contact with us, calling us traitors and accusing us of abandoning him. He spun the situation in his favor, posting on social media about how I had kicked him out and ruined his life. Some of our extended family members believed his version of events and started blaming me, which made things even more stressful. But I stood firm. I knew I had done the right thing, and as much as it hurt, I couldn't let him manipulate me anymore. It was clear that Ryan wasn't going to change unless he faced real consequences, and I was done being his safety net. The fallout from my ultimatum with Ryan was inevitable, and it didn't take long for things to escalate. After I gave him the deadline to start contributing or leave, he barely acknowledged it, acting as if I was bluffing. But I wasn't. I was done waiting, and I was ready to stand firm on my decision, no matter how messy things got. The day came when I had to follow through. The morning of the deadline, I found myself pacing in the kitchen, trying to keep my emotions in check. When Ryan walked in, looking completely unfazed, I knew this was it. He had made no effort to pay his share or show any responsibility. "Ryan," I said, my voice calm but firm, "I told you this was your deadline. You haven't paid a single bill and you're still not looking for work. I gave you 2 weeks and now it's time for you to leave." Ryan's face twisted with anger, his eyes flashing. "You're really kicking me out?" he sneered. "After everything I've been through, you're abandoning your family?" I didn't back down. "I'm not abandoning anyone. You're the one who refuses to take responsibility. You've been living here rent-free, eating our food, and using our utilities without any regard for the consequences. I'm done supporting you, Ryan." The tension in the room was palpable. Mom, who had been quiet up until that point, finally spoke. "Maybe we could work something out. Maybe just give him more time." I looked at her, feeling the weight of her words, but I knew deep down that this had gone on long enough. "No, Mom, this isn't about time. He's had plenty of time. He's had months. He needs to grow up and figure this out on his own." Ryan's face turned red with fury. "This is how you're treating me, huh? After everything I've been through? How could you do this to me?" He stormed out, slamming the door behind him, leaving me standing there, exhausted but resolute. The next few days were tense. Ryan refused to acknowledge me, and the atmosphere in the house became unbearable. He gave me the silent treatment, and when he did speak, it was passive-aggressive. He would make snide remarks, loud enough for everyone to hear, about how I thought I was better than him. It was wearing me down, but I kept reminding myself that I was doing the right thing. The real breaking point came when I received the water bill again. Ryan's share was still unpaid, and the company was threatening to shut off our service if we didn't pay the full amount. I had no choice but to pay it, but the frustration boiled over when I confronted him. "You said you would pay me back," I said, barely holding back my anger. "You've said that for weeks, and now you're not even helping with basic things like the water bill?" Ryan shrugged like it was no big deal. "I'll pay you back eventually, okay? Relax." "Enough," I snapped, cutting him off. "You've had months to get your act together, and you haven't done a thing. I'm not going to cover for you anymore." The tension in the house was unbearable. Every time I came home from work, I'd find Ryan's gaming chair in the living room, his snack wrappers scattered around, and his room a complete mess. He wasn't even trying to contribute, and I wasn't going to keep enabling him. That night, I found out from a family friend that Ryan had been spending his days hanging out at bars, claiming he was job hunting. I couldn't believe it. He had lied to us for weeks, and I couldn't let it slide anymore. I told him, point blank, that if he didn't start taking responsibility for his actions, he would have to leave. It wasn't an empty threat. It was the truth. Ryan tried to manipulate the situation. "You can't kick me out. I'm your brother." What kind of family does that? The words stung, but I stood my ground. A family that respects each other and holds each other accountable. "You're not doing that, Ryan. And I'm not going to keep pretending like you are." In the end, he packed his things and left, but not without drama. His room was a disaster zone. Old clothes, empty soda cans, and food wrappers piled up. He didn't even bother to clean up before he left. He just grabbed his things, his gaming chair and a couple of bags, and stormed out without a word. I spent the next few hours cleaning up the mess. It was disgusting. The smell of old food was overwhelming, and I had to rent a carpet cleaner just to get the stains out. As I sorted through his things, I realized that some of my personal belongings were missing. My noise-canceling headphones and a couple of gift cards I had left in my drawer. When I confronted Mom about it, she admitted that Ryan had asked to borrow them, but she didn't realize he had taken them. I felt a mix of anger and disappointment. My own brother had stolen from me. It was hard to process. The situation didn't end there. A week later, I found out that the landlord had received noise complaints from the neighbors. Apparently, Ryan had been playing loud music and yelling late at night, and we were at risk of facing penalties. It was embarrassing, but I had to explain to the landlord that Ryan had already moved out. Things continued to spiral as I received calls from debt collectors. Ryan had left behind some unpaid bills, and because we shared an address, they tracked me down. I spent hours on the phone explaining the situation and making it clear that I wasn't responsible for his debts. To top it all off, Ryan took to social media, painting me as the villain. He claimed I had kicked him out with no warning, making me look heartless. Extended family members started reaching out to scold me for ruining the family, but I didn't care anymore. I knew I had done the right thing. In the end, I realized something important. I wasn't responsible for Ryan's mistakes, and I couldn't keep letting him take advantage of me. It wasn't easy, but I finally had the courage to set boundaries. And for the first time in months, the house felt like a peaceful, safe place again.